The first time I saw the old machine was as Benny's father closed his study door to us. It was already a relic then, a heap of beige plastic from a bygone era. The monitor was a beige box with a screen made of thick glass. It must have weighed a ton. It sat odious on the rectangular beige case that contained its thinking guts. Peripherals included a keyboard, a mouse, and a phone. The phone was not a flat-screened supercomputer the way the phones of today are. It was a simple speaker and receiver, with a rotating dial instead of buttons. Technically, it was capable of making calls from a connected landline. But this was not its true purpose. Its true purpose was to make communication between the internet and the old machine possible. It did this through the magic of sound. According to Benny, who heard it from his father, the data from the internet came in the form of audible sound. Once it was called, the phone could be placed on a stand from which the old machine could hear the signals and translate them back into binary code. My imagination stirred at the idea of hearing the internet. Or chat with friends from around the world. Benny probably more than me. He lived with the damn thing. However, it was off limits. As much as we wanted to hear the internet, Benny's father would not have it. His study was entirely forbidden to us, and on the few occasions when he had allowed us entry to give us a word of sage advice or to admonish us for childish antics, he would use himself as a physical barrier between us and the old machine. His physical language was such that neither Benny or I had ever thought to ask for permission. Neither of us believed he would even consider the idea, and the most likely outcome would be that he would make it all that much harder to do so behind his back. So we waited, bided our time. As children, this was all that was afforded to us. This forced patience paid off. There came a very unusual day in Benny's house. Often it was Benny's mother who was charged with the daily maintenance of the household, but outstanding circumstances meant that she was forced to take the day off. If I remember correctly, it was to do with Benny's grandmother, but that is neither here nor there. The important thing is that Benny's father had to take over the daily run of the house. Part of that was buying the groceries for that night's dinner. So here was a rare moment when the study would be left completely unattended. The moment we heard his father's car leave the driveway, we were on it. The door to his father's study, where the old machine was kept, was locked. But we accounted for this. Benny had been practicing opening the locks around his house, and they were all the same make and model. Benny stuck the finer end of a hairpin into the keyhole and opened the lock as quickly as if he had the key. The door swung open, and perched on the desk was the old machine in all its pristine beige glory. It was a comically frightful thing, that heap of beige plastic. It sat there, decades old at least, and yet the casing showed no sign of yellowing. The screen, which showed that it was turned off, was a yawning black abyss, and the deadly silence of the room was disturbed by something that was not quite tangible, but an almost physical mental pressure, like gentle psychic breathing. The pressure was such that you could feel it in the base of your skull, and much more lightly, around your head and in your ears. It made one feel as if they were in the presence of a great monster, and not, in fact, an old beige box of outdated electronics. "Come on," said Benny, stepping into the room. Evidently I had been stuck in place for some time. Benny, on the other hand, seemed much less wary than me. He scampered forward, smiling as he pulled back his father's study chair so he could stand on it and reach the strange phone with its rotating dial. Not nearly as brave, and suddenly 3 times more cautious, I stood back as he picked up the phone to listen to the internet, depending on how you view it. The phone was luckily, or rather unluckily, in its translation stand, meaning that it was at that time communicating with the internet. Benny's face twisted uncomfortably before breaking into a giddy smile. "Ooh," he said, smiling. "That's creepy." He held it to his ear like that for a minute or so, wrinkling his nose from time to time before smiling again and throwing me a conspiratorial smirk. His giddy enthusiasm, despite the sound being what he called creepy, seemed to calm me down some. Benny always had a way of doing that to me. Suddenly I was excited. He saw this and offered me his place on his father's seat. "Here, he said, still smirking. It's terrible. I took his place on the seat and picked up the phone. It was heavier than I expected, heavier than any smartphone I had ever held. It was like picking up the lighter end of an animal's meaty tail. I felt a sudden hesitation, but Benny was still brimming with joy, goading me to have a listen. I put the phone to my ear and heard whispers. Surprised, I let the phone slip out of my hands to clatter to the floor. They had been quiet whispers, barely audible, but audible they were. The whispers painted a picture for me. A sticky red room, a friend, here but not here. I saw the old machine in a new home, and with a new keeper, a willing thrall. I think Benny would have laughed at me if he had not also been struck stupid in that same moment. Standing in the doorway of his study was his father. It is difficult to speak ill of the dead, which is funny, because it's not like they care, but that's just the way of things. Benny's father had always been a kind man. If not a kind man, then certainly a dutiful father. He was always there for Benny, always there to give a word of wisdom or a consoling hug. But on occasion, there was a glint of something sinister behind his eyes. It appeared sporadically, mostly during conversations with other adults. Somewhere in the middle of a conversation between the tragic loss of a child in another state or several towns over, or in discussing the statistic and calculus of death, such as a mass shooting, that furtive sparkle behind his eye would manifest, and he would become, for a fraction of a second, someone else. That spark was there now, and it was aimed at me. Benny's father saw that I had the phone in my hand. He saw his boy beside me, and that spark behind his eye turned into a barely controlled flame. There was so much hate there. "Benjamin," he said in a deathly calm voice, in a heavily restrained voice, "please tell me you didn't let your friend here talk you into picking up that phone." "He didn't, Dad. He didn't," answered Benny. "Did you pick up the phone too?" "Of course not, Dad." Benny lied. Relief washed over his father's face. He ran past the threshold of the study and knelt down to wrap his arms around his boy. He then looked at me. "Get out," he said quietly, nearly on the verge of tears. Then again, louder, "Get out!" I was still too stunned to move, even after the second shout, but then Benny's father rose, with Benny still in his hands. The menace I felt. I bolted from the study, running past Benny and his father. I learned from Benny at school the next day that we weren't allowed to play together anymore. Benny's father didn't even want to see me anywhere near him. It was ridiculous. We were neighbors, for crying out loud. Benny was my best friend. Who else was I going to play with? And for what? But it didn't matter. Benny's father had made his decree, and Benny had to abide. At least we still had school. Benny's father couldn't dictate who he spoke to there. Benny and I sulked for that whole school day, unable to enjoy the little time we were going to have together. We sulked like that together at school for ages, and in this way, the strange whispers that we heard in the phone were almost forgotten, overshadowed by our forced separation. Every day after school, I hoped and prayed that my exile from Benny's home would end, and in a roundabout and terrible way, my prayers were answered. A year later, Benny was pulled from class, after which he disappeared for a week. His home, which was next to mine, sat dark and empty. For a whole week I heard nothing from him, not any social platform or messaging medium. When I finally did hear from him, it was no longer Benny. It was the shell of a person that had once been a child. It was Benny, aged eons. The broken shell that had been Benny stumbled into class. He said nothing, and looked at no one. It wasn't until lunch period that I finally got anything out of him. And when I did, I don't think I could ever have been ready to hear it. That day that Benny had been pulled out of class was the day that his mother had been arrested for the murder of his father. She was found in his study, and according to police, was basically mid-act. How the police were alerted so quickly as to show up with the crime in progress was never fully revealed to Benny personally. But news coverage afterwards revealed that an anonymous tip had arrived at the police station. Benny's mother would stand by her innocence until the very end, but the fact that she was witnessed by police in the middle of committing the act made it indefensible. Her trajectory to the lethal injection room was one of the swiftest the state had ever seen. It was tragic. Benny was out both parents, and it was all the more tragic because Benny didn't have any other family. His last grandparent had passed the year prior. He was due to go into foster care, but God bless my parents, because they took him in. Benny got to stay in town, with a family that loved him nearly as much as his own had. Benny stayed in my life. It was the reverse of what had happened the year prior, when his father had found us listening to the internet on the old machine. Now Benny was in my life more than ever, but also not. Physically, he was there. Benny and I shared a room, and we hung out all the time, mentally, or perhaps even spiritually. Benny just wasn't with me anymore. His soul was in some God's forsaken elsewhere. His inner self was closed off to me. My mind didn't have the words or wisdom to say what was wrong, only that despite being around him nearly 24 hours a day, he felt absent. It wasn't until later, much later, years later really, when Benny and I were well into our teens that I felt like I saw the real him again. His home, and everything in it. The things that had once been his father's were his. He'd never cared much about that. He'd never even mentioned his not exactly meager inheritance beyond the vague idea that he supposed he would move into his old home once he became an adult. Other than that, he made no mention of his old home, which sat dim and forgotten next to mine. He hadn't so much as stepped inside of it since he left for school on the day of the murder. But one day, on the porch, while the sun was beginning to die on the horizon, Benny asked me if I would go into his old house with him. We were pushing 17 and college-bound, so I supposed at the time that he was seeking a kind of closure. Despite the vast chasm that Benny's depression had carved between us, I wanted to be there for my best friend, so I agreed to go along with him. Once we were at his old doorstep, Benny produced a small, unopened envelope. He tore it open and produced a key that he used to open the door to his old home. I watched him do this and felt a pang in my heart that was something more than sadness. I didn't have a name for it. I just knew that it was coming from Benny. The straw that broke the camel's back was Benny looking behind him to see me, and flashing me the barest hint of a smile that was filled with the same sadness that panged in my chest a moment ago. It was the tiniest crease on the corner of his mouth, but it broke me. That crease was the most genuine thing I'd gotten from him in years. I wish I had been brave enough to cry, but I swallowed those tears, drowned out all emotion, because I thought that was what the burgeoning man I wanted to become would have done. We entered the house, which was dark and smelled awful. There was a rot in there that had settled into the very foundation. "Oh!" I let out. "What is that?" I don't know. That's what he said. But something told me that he did know. He just didn't want to say it out loud for some reason. In my role as supportive best friend, I still hadn't asked why Benny had wanted to come back here, so I decided to do that then. But as he ascended up the stairs, I knew there was only one destination he had in mind. His father's study, the old machine. I kept my mouth shut, but I wonder sometimes if maybe I should have started protesting. I wonder if maybe I should have dragged Benny back out the door, kicking and screaming. But those are just what-ifs and meaningless regrets. Even if I dragged him out then and there, so what? He would just come back without me. If I had barred him in any way, he would just choose a different time and place. And he would be doing it alone. No, I had no choice. It was inevitable. There's no stopping the inevitable. So I did nothing. We ascended up the stairs together. The smell of deep-seated rot grew heavier. It was in the stairs, in the walls, in wood and the furniture. Apart from the smell, everything looked normal, as if frozen in time. I could practically envision us running down the hallway playing tag. That changed in the study. Benny and I reached the door. Yellow police tape from when this was an active crime scene was still there. The rot was strongest here. Had the site of the murder never been cleaned? As Benny turned the knob, I swallowed back some anxious energy and stowed it away in the same place that I threw that soul-breaking pang in my heart. Inside, we found the desk, the bookshelves, his father's office chair. All of it was as it once was, except that now every inch of it was covered in a film of something that was muddy red, the sticky red room. There was only one part of the study that was disturbingly clean of the muddy red source of the rot. The old machine. It sat perched on the desk, slumber, waiting. It was pristine. Its comically mundane beige casing was clean, and every piece and peripheral, like the keyboard and attached phone, were in mint condition. It was alien. How clean it was compared to everything else in the room. Benny took a heavy breath and stepped forward. He approached the old machine, examining it in the dying light of the sun. "I'm going to need your help carrying this back home," he said. This would have been my second opportunity to say no. I should have. But again, why? All it would mean was another trip or two for him on his lonesome. And then I would just be the friend that bailed out on him halfway through something that seemed very important for him. So I said, okay. We gathered up the odd ends of the old machine. Benny carried the monitor, and I carried the thinking guts. And between us, we shared the weight of the peripherals. Once we were home, Benny got to work putting the thing back together. He seemed to fly into a manic fugue state. He worked rapidly to put the old machine together, connecting every odd end. Beginning to sweat as he did so, his eyes became deranged, and then suddenly, with only the power cord left to plug in, he stopped. He stared into the black abyss of the old machine's monitor, and did nothing for a long minute that stretched out into eternity. Benny put the power cord down and shoved it into a box. I didn't question this. If anything, I was relieved. I hadn't realized it until just then. But as Benny was putting the thing together, I had started to feel a deadly pressure building in the back of my skull. I didn't dare ask why he stopped, worried that I might accidentally reignite his resolve. Together we chose to forget the old machine, or so I thought. The last few months of our senior year passed, and they were the best months I'd had with Benny in a long, long while. I think collecting that beige heap of plastic, that old machine, it had brought something to a close for him. Whether it was simple catharsis or something more, I'll never know. But I'll cherish those last few months for the rest of my life. It was the last I'd ever see of Benny again. With college came real distance, and although we kept in touch through video and text, we never met in person. The times just never lined up. Benny was his own man, and although it brought a small amount of heartbreak to my parents that their adoptive son never seemed to find the time to visit them, they were more than anything glad to see that he at least seemed to be enjoying life. That was definitely the facade he sold on social media. It was at the start of my second year at college that I got the first wisp that something was wrong with Benny. He sent me something, a file that I couldn't open, in a format that I didn't recognize. I thought it must be some kind of obscure meme. But when I couldn't decipher it, I got a pit in my stomach and I sent him a brisk WTF. He never replied. It was the last of anything I would ever get from Benny personally. A few weeks later, my parents contacted me to tell me that Benny had killed himself. What followed was a rapid procession of life. That I somehow managed to continue to turn in my schoolwork for the next week or so was a fact. That I then used the following fall break to attend Benny's funeral was also true. Mixed in, there was a meeting with a lawyer that let me know that I was the sole inheritor of Benny's estate. This all happened, and I have a very superficial recollection of it all. But in truth, I was half a ghost myself. My body, no, my soul, had gone into a form of catatonia. I became an unchanging statue, a rock in the ever-flowing stream of life. Things happened, but they seemed to flow past me in a ceaseless stream of almost memories. On the last day of the fall semester, in a fit of peak depression, looking for something to occupy the void of my soul, I remembered the message that Benny had sent me. I redoubled my efforts to decipher the unknown file type and scoured the internet for a decoder or playback device that would be able to read it for me. Eventually, I stumbled on the answer. It was a type of sound file. With that information, it was surprisingly simple to find an app to play it back. I brought the file over to my phone and loaded it into the app and hit play. What came out were whispers. I dropped my phone like it was made of hot iron. The phone clattered to the floor, but kept playing the whispers, which remained just at the edge of audibility, no matter how far away I retreated from them. When it finished playing, I was relieved. I also realized I had understood none of it, unlike the whispers I had heard in my childhood. These had been unintelligible. I tried them again, but although I could hear something, I could make out nothing, but I knew a way that I could. The old machine. The next opportunity I got, I went home. I went back up to my room to look for the old machine, but of course it wasn't there. It hadn't been there for a long time. Benny had taken it with him when he went his own way during college. I had to ask my parents to help me find it, and they directed me to the garage, where boxes of Benny's old things were piled up. Things he had taken with him, and things that he had acquired while he was away at college. The old machine was packed into one of those boxes, with a sticky note on the screen, a phone number, possibly left there by Benny himself. I took the box up to my old room and got to work putting the old machine back together. Slowly it came alive, and bit by bit I felt that dreadful pressure building in the base of my skull. As I connected the monitor to the thinking guts, I felt a spark of awareness, as if I was suddenly in danger or being watched. As I connected the peripherals, the pressure around my skull grew heavier and I began to sweat. The feeling only intensified as I plugged the thing into the power, and it came to a peak when I finally connected the strange phone stand to the internet. "It's alive!" Gods of all faith and creed. "Help me! It's alive!" I turned it on. The screen lit up, and I noticed that I'd forgotten to remove the sticky note that had been placed there. I ripped it off and crumpled it in my palm as I watched the old machine finish its startup sequence. I'm not sure what I expected. I certainly hadn't expected it to feel so normal, or look so mundane. The operating system was definitely proprietary, but other than that, it felt no more alien than Windows, or Apple. Navigating it felt as natural as anything. I found the program that would allow me to interpret the whisper recording on my phone. It was the same one that would normally connect to the internet. I would put my smartphone up to the translator while the recording played. I did this, and for a few tense moments, nothing seemed to happen. And then I noticed that something had been downloaded onto the desktop. The file was called Dad1, and for a moment I felt like an idiot. The 1 appearing after the word Dad suggested that a version of this file was already downloaded, and of course it would be. This was probably where Benny had sent me the file from. I checked the now translated file and saw that it was a video. The thumbnail showed a man sitting at his desk. Benny's dad. My hand trembled as it reached for the mouse and clicked on the video. The video was a top-down perspective of the study, and it started at 100. There was no build-up or context to what was happening on the screen. Benny's father was skinning himself alive. The footage of it was grainy, and was twice as disturbing for it, because the more skin that Benny's father peeled off, the more grainy red pixels appeared on screen. It was difficult to tell how much of this Benny's father was doing of his own volition. Heavily pixelated expressions of agony played on his face. He twisted and squirmed. He writhed in pain and appeared to yell into the ceiling as he striped reels of flesh from his arm, and then his legs, and then his chest, and on and on. I couldn't look away. As much as I wanted to look away, I couldn't. I was forced to watch by my own horribly morbid fascination. God help me. No, God forgive me. I could not look away. It was Benny's father's twisted and pained flailing that covered the study in blood, leaving the room red and sticky. How he produced so much blood. And in fact, how he had been able to remain conscious this whole time was a mystery to anyone. The act didn't stop until a light appeared from off-screen, and then suddenly Benny's mother barged into the study to see her screaming husband. He tried to skin her alive as well, but she fought back. They began to wrestle each other, slipping in the wet puddle of his blood. Soon, the blood itself stopped being the worst thing on display, as the father's viscera began to spill out of him, the membrane that had held it together inside his abdomen splitting open in the tussle. It was an awful scene, and still, I couldn't look away. The fight continued like that for some time, with the two of them on the ground, fighting for control of the knife that the father had used to skin himself alive. Even with half the father spilt and spread around the room, it was a hard-won victory for Benny's mother. She finally managed to wrestle the knife away from the dying man and plunged it into his chest, just as shadows appeared from the direction of the doorway. The mother broke down as police aimed their guns at her, and then the video ended. Did you like it? Appeared in text over the end of the video. What the fuck? I remember saying out loud, why hadn't Benny turned this in? I thought, his mom was dead. Sure, but why not clear her name? Why hadn't he told me straight away what he'd found? Why had he... I didn't let myself ask that last question. Instead, I unclenched my palm and looked at the crumpled sticky note. If there was a logical answer to any of this, then maybe it was on the other end of that number. That's what I told myself anyway. I put my phone away and picked up the phone attached to the old machine. It took a few tries to get the method of dialing correct. I'd never used a rotary-style phone before, and I didn't know how to spin the wheel to dial the number that I needed. But I managed it. The phone rang for a bit, and then the whispers started to erupt from whatever black beyond I called. I placed the phone on the translator, and on the monitor, the desktop came alive. The old machine's proprietary web browser opened and landed on a bare, bones-white web page. It reminded me somewhat of a dark web directory. The dark web isn't as difficult to navigate as you might think. The difference between a dark website and a regular one is that dark websites are unlisted, meaning they don't show up on search engines, and often they require special browsers and specific URLs. Those URLs are usually kept on some kind of surface web directory. This looked a lot like that. A list of URLs ran down the bare bones page in a ladder of blue. They were hyperlinks, all of them, and one of them stood out to me immediately. Do you want to see how he did it? It read. It shouldn't have freaked me out. There was no way that Link could be talking about Benny, which is where my mind went first. There was simply no way. So I clicked it, and I guess there was. Somehow there was a way. I won't say what I saw. It wasn't nearly as graphic as his father's death. In that sense, it wasn't nearly as interesting, but even still, I can't bring myself to recount it. It's too personal. In that way, it was much, much worse. So much worse. The look in his eyes, despair. There was something almost beautiful about it. No, there was something beautiful about it. At the end of the video, a familiar message popped up. Did you like it? A box beneath the video asked for a reply. I typed one in. Do you want to see more? Another box, another reply. I saw more. My last flat was unbearable. I mean, you try having a family of 11 live above you, when half of them are under the age of 8. Also, try having a pair of raging alcoholic neighbors on either side of you, a pair who were once married to each other. My eyes rivaled that of pigeons due to no sleep. I lasted a total of 21 days. I know, new record, huh? I just about shoved the keys back in the grubby hands of my landlord when I finally saw the lunacy inscribed on his face. No wonder the rent was dirt cheap. So I was back on the road, not on the streets though. Luckily enough, I started questioning the flat by day 8, looked around for another place by day 15, and made a decision to get the hell out on day 18. 3 days of packing and it was bye-bye. My new place seemed all the better too, yes. The rent was more expensive, and yes, it only has 2 bedrooms, but at least it was a house, one where pesky neighbors were at least 5 meters away. On my right, at least. On my left, their house, thankfully, couldn't even be seen where I stood. Parking my car, I skipped up towards my new house with my fresh set of keys, and on entering, silence, perfect still silence. Thank the Lord. I basked in it for a while before returning to my car, unloading some of my baggage. It took 3-4 hauls, but I managed to fit it into one of the bedrooms. Thankfully, the rest of my things were to be brought by moving vans in about an hour. I envisioned what the house could look like with a few finishing touches. But first, I eyed the 2 rooms. Mine! The room I had chosen to be mine gave a bright view of my own smaller garden, as well as a portion of my right neighbor's house, but that didn't matter much. The view in the other room would suck, just my car and some reeds. I was just about done heaving some of my baggage into my newly chosen room when the doorbell gave an obnoxious ring. I stood, fighting the urge to just run away into one of my rooms when it beeped again. Reaching the door, I eyed out of the peephole to see nothing but an opaque whiteness. I guess the downside in this house is that the last tenant was a slob. I eyed some of the yellowing walls. Sighing, I opened the door. "Hello, we're your neighbors, Jack and Sally, and we live just there." She motioned towards my right. "We came to introduce ourselves and to let you know that if you ever need anything, we're right here." She then shoved a basket full of biscuits at my chest. A motherly smile stretched around her lips. She turned to leave. Husband, clearly forced to follow her, in tow. When she turned around, "Your name, dear?" "Lean," I shouted after her. Perfect. And perfect it was. I thought, neighbors that respect their distance from you and give you food. I eyed the delicious snacks in front of me. Definitely an upgrade. Though it was at dawn the very next day that I woke up. Shook. See, I was just sleeping in my newly delivered bed when I heard it. Something did like a huge caw before it alternated into different pitches. Disoriented, I tried to wipe the sleep from my eyes in order to focus better, but it just made me more confused. It sounded like a chicken. As far as I know, this new place was not the countryside, nor farmland. So what, and why? I stepped up to my window to take a good look outside. I wouldn't keep a rooster in my home, that's for sure. Whatever it was coming from... My jaw dropped. I closed my eyes and scrubbed at them harshly. Please tell me why I opened my eyes and saw the exact same thing. A man, on his haunches, face pointed towards the sky, was making rooster noises. And he was on my neighbor's garden, the ones I met earlier. He looked absolutely demented. I wasn't even scared then, just flabbergasted. I wasted no time calling the police at this disturbing nuisance. When they arrived, though, I saw my neighbors shoot straight from their house, speaking, or was it pleading, with the officers. What on earth? Anyway, it was their problem now, so I went back to bed. I had a whole bunch of chores the next day and had to get it all sorted before I returned to work. Shutting my eyes, I wished for peace and quiet. Thank you very much. At last, I woke up at 10 a.m. By 1 p.m., I had sorted my clothing into its respective drawers and had decorated my bedroom walls, including a new golden addition. And now, I had food cooking on the stove. It felt satisfying, having cleaned up and now awaiting the prize of food. I scrolled on my phone as I waited for the pasta to cook, before another ding turned my attention towards the door. Huh, what now? Unfortunately, I hadn't cleaned the peephole yet, so I had to open the door. There stood Jack and Sally, or Sally and Jack. Jack looked lost. Sally stared deep into my eyes. "Was it you?" "Me? What do you mean?" "That called the police last night." I recalled the past night and gave her a thumbs up, hoping my smile was reassuring. "Yep, don't worry. That lunatic will not be coming back ever again. He can go to the zoo if he wants to squawk." I should have taken the cue from Jack's paling face, but Sally grabbed hold of me. "Listen here, okay? That man, the one you called the police on," she trembled. "He's my son. You can't do that. He was not even on your property." My eyes widened. "He's your son?" "Of course. How can you not see that?" Nodding at her, I relinquished myself from the hold she had on my arms. "Okay then. Sorry for the call, but I do have to mention something." Jack started to shake his head behind his wife, but I ignored the little to say man. "Is there any way you can keep the noise down to a minimum? Honestly, your son has vocal cords of steel. It would wake the entire neighborhood at this rate." Sally stared pointedly at me, then took a look around my house. "Very well." She grabbed her husband's arm as she turned to leave, and I caught the slightest look of fear in his eyes before he was abruptly pulled away. I dismissed it, and the sinking feeling, on discovering my very soft, overcooked pasta when I came back into my home, though. I managed to also do one thing before wrapping up. I cleaned out my door's peephole. Now I wouldn't have to open the door to know it's them. I'd just speak at them from the inside if they were to come back. I woke jolting out of my bed the very next morning. Or night. I checked my bedside clock to see it was 3:50 a.m. The cock-a-doodle-doo was breaking into my head. I grasped my hair in frustration, knowing that I didn't have the madman's parents' phone numbers to call, or maybe scream at them. It was the exact same thing as the day before, except maybe. I strained my ear. It sounded a lot closer. My hands, for some reason, became clammy instantly, and the urgent thumping of my own heart, the fragility of my own life, became all the more prominent. I tiptoed to my window and peeked outside. Nothing. I then slowly treaded to my spare bedroom and pulled the curtains apart. Zilch. Nada. Though, almost as if under a spell, my head turned towards my main door. I could somehow feel it. Just to confirm, though, I peeked out of the door hole, and with a slam, I collapsed in my new dream home. When I came to, I was lying on white sheets, and a bright white light hung over me. A hospital. I was in my own room, which I found odd. It was not like I needed it. But then a doctor walked in, followed by 3 other people, and it all made sense. Everything, blurs and sureness, melted into a perfect picture. Sally, Jack, and their son. He couldn't be more than 17, really, though he looked 37 a few hours ago, face pressed against the glass of my peephole, mouth wide open towards it, eyes pointing in different directions as his face reddened and contorted. I was deaf in one moment. Then came the cock-a-doodle-doo. Of course I fainted. Who could blame me? Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Lamb. You're in A&E right now. Are you able to tell me your full name and date of birth? My voice answered the doctor's questions, but my eyes stared dazed at the youngster's abdomen, not daring to reach its eyes. Well, nothing seems to be wrong with you. You may have just been dehydrated. Did you have any headache or pain before you fainted? I replied in the negative. Luckily, your friend's son had found you passed out and ensured your speedy arrival to hospital, so I wouldn't be worried about any damage. My eyes finally strayed, looking towards the ground. I held the nauseousness of bile down my throat. Following a brief checkup, I was allowed to leave, and 2 people and a demon followed me out. Well, Lane, that should give you a lesson. Sally. I turned towards the family, who stood in a 3-person arc. Only one managed to look away, equal parts shame and guilt. I don't need to mention who that was. Don't worry, you can look at me. I don't bite, not now and not at dawn. A strained voice whispered at me. I promise. It's only at dawn when I... Hush, Dean. Don't work your voice that much. You'll need to save it for later. I was still dizzy. That didn't stop me from running half-hobbled to the taxi stand, where I begged and claimed to many that I would provide double payment if they were to take me to my house. It took a while, but I managed to pack some of my clothes. There was no way in hell I was sleeping at that damned house again. Not now. Not ever. I called and booked at a nearby hotel in the meantime. I was done packing necessities by the evening, walking out of my house. I saw no sign of those 3. I would have been relieved had I not come face to face with than one thing, standing in my garden, leaning against my car. My breathing picked up instantly. Dean. It stood with its back resting against my car, and it noticed me immediately. Seems like it was just waiting for me to notice it. Are you leaving? It sounded almost sad, but I needed it to move away, or my only way out of there would be in jeopardy. For the night. My answer? Almost smooth, but even I could hear the first shake in my voice. It nodded, though. Okay, and he moved from my car. I counted the distance. 1 metre. 2. Famsa. It made a sudden dash at me as I, in flight response, ran frantically to the driver's seat, locking the door. I came in half squashed, my backpack still on my back, but I didn't care. Its face was pressed against the window. Mum is waiting for a person that will like me for me, not run away. You're supposed to like me, it said, matter-of-factly. It then wailed, and sunk car window. I did not dare to sit up and see what it was doing. I didn't even need to, though. The sound came a split second later.
Cock-a-doodle-doo!
Tears spilled from my eyes. My limbs felt weak. I couldn't even breathe. It suddenly sprang up to the window, eyes enlarged, looking at me and everywhere at once. I can actually cock in the day too, but M. Doodle said it would be too much for you. Wheezing, it exclaimed again before adding, "But this is me. Do you like me?" With dead limbs, I weighed my foot on the pedal and jump-started the car to speed off. My head shook left and right in response, stomach heaving with nausea. Human preservation kicked me into taking proper control of the car when I saw, out of the rear-view mirror, Sally, this time with a rope, which locked around the creature's neck before she tugged, drawing it into her house. At one point we locked eyes, and what do I mean by we? Answer, the two of them and me. It was honestly a miracle that I did not get into a road traffic accident. I spent 3 days living in the hotel after that, my job long forgotten in the aftermath. By day 4, I broke down and called my older sister, asking to stay at her place for a while. Her house and area seemed fine the times I'd stopped over. I guess I clearly did not seem right though, as she many a time asked me what was wrong. My answer? Stress. She persisted. Years of living together as kids helping her figure out my lies. Though she ultimately gave up after a week, she knew it was something I didn't want to share, and that I was safe now. That was enough for her. For me, I guess at the time I so badly wanted to tell someone, though it couldn't be my sister. I didn't want to cause any trouble, nor see if she'd even believe me, or instead rank me at the same IQ level as her 2 5-year-olds. For a few weeks, I stayed with my sister and her family, reassuring both her and myself that I was fine. Thankfully, we worked together to find a small apartment, next to a kid's school too, bonus points. I now craved safety above all else. After moving out though, I realized I needed my belongings back. So, who picked up my stuff from that cursed residence? You ask? The moving people. I called the police from a random phone booth first to head over to that area, emphasizing on seeing some suspicious-looking men, whilst I got them to collect everything. I did not dare to call the police on that family though. I would prefer if the link between me and them got cut, drawn and quartered. So now I'm here, in an apartment which thankfully hasn't shown any sign of insanity. Inspecting my belongings, I noticed that there was one thing missing. My gold frame, used to encase my makeshift certificate, made by yours truly after her 21-day record from the previous apartment, was gone. I felt somewhat miffed, but then I realized something. Something which can maybe bring the light out in this whole situation. I counted carefully. I broke my record, with a grand stay of 2 days, now that I don't think I'd ever be able to beat. Before I go any further with this, I know I have done some pretty stupid things over the years, and I never really believed in the paranormal until this incident happened. So about when me and my best friend were in high school, year 11 to be exact, I was staying over at her place for the weekend after I had finished my work shift. It was around this time my best friend had an art project that was due soonish, and she didn't have any inspiration to help her create something original. Then she came up with the idea to do a freaky photo shoot to see if that would help inspire her to create something, and I ended up being her muse, you could say. And mind you, she is very much into special effects and stuff, as she is a makeup artist in the making. So by the time she was finished with the makeup, you could say I looked like a decaying and walking corpse. We decided to take some photos out in her backyard and then go analysis the pictures. Some got her attention and some didn't. So then I cleaned myself up and then we tried again, but this time an elf-like character. That's when I got the brilliant, not so brilliant idea that maybe we should got to the nearby lake, since there was some awesome places there that would be perfect. Mind you, it was already 11:30 p.m. at night. The first mistake we made was actually going through with that idea at 11:30 p.m. at night, which, well, it was pretty stupid to begin with, since with all the bad things happening around our local area, missing people, animals, murders, etc. That alone should have been a clear indication that we shouldn't be going. That wasn't a thought to us in the slightest. So when my best friend drives us there and parks in the big empty car park, which was another clear indicator that we really shouldn't be there, we just sat in her car for a good minute just discussing how the photos should be taken. Then that's when I got a chill down my spine and the sensation that we were being watched from somewhere. That feeling never left, and to this day I can't believe my stupid self had just blatantly ignored that altogether. I wasn't the only one. My best friend also got the exact same feeling I did, and then we proceeded to get out of her car and start taking photos like we discussed. She has fake realistic swords and other weapons, so we were using those as props, and everything was going perfectly fine, besides feeling like we were being watched. What happened next still makes my heart stop, because the place we were at had hiking and biking trails, as well as being surrounded by a woodland area. What we heard whilst in the middle of taking some more photos was the sound between a strangled and drying animal mix with a high-pitched human scream, and when I tell, it sounded way too close comfort. I mean, it sounded too close for comfort. That sound lasted for a good solid minute, just one singular sound with no breath in between it. Then it stopped and went eerily quiet. Way too quiet. Now looking back on it, there was no sound of insects making any noise when we got out of the car, and there was very certainly none after that sound, which only means that there was a predator or something of the sorts nearby. I thought I was just hearing things, or thought it possibly was just a native animal of sorts. At this point, me and best friend were starting to freak out a little bit, because then we heard the sound of sticks on ground snapping in half to the right of us near one of the hiking trails, which wasn't too far from where we were not that long ago. We tried to not panic and finish the last of the photos. That was dumb, idiotic idea, no. But at this point we have made a few. I think I was zoning out and focusing on what she wanted me to. For example, like hold the sword in a swinging position like you were about to slay down beast. I sensed that my best friend had stopped giving instructions and looked to her to see that she was standing and looking terrified, to say the least. This was our conversation in that moment. Me, you good? My best friend slowly come over to me. But whatever you do, don't. Look, behind you. When she said those words, I instinctively and very stupidly looked behind me, to see that standing about a good 10 meters or so from me was a tall, stocky, but lean black figure that wasn't quite human nor animal from the looks of it. But at first I thought I was a kangaroo. Yes, I forgot to mention we live in Australia, with the way it was carrying itself. A very big kangaroo in this instance. I then wished that I hadn't looked, and now looked back at my best friend, and now realized we needed to leave immediately. Because whatever the hell that thing behind me was, definitely wasn't friendly at all. But we couldn't just bolt off back to the car, as that would definitely cause the thing to chase down, and it definitely would catch up with no trouble at all. So we had to, as calmly as possible, pick up our belongings and slowly go back to the car. But since I didn't know what hell we were dealing with, I didn't want to keep my back it, as that would have very, very stupid, and I wanted to make sure it was still there. Thankfully it was. But as soon as we got to her car and quickly got in, making sure the doors were locked, I looked out the windshield and saw that it was no longer there. We quickly hightailed it out of there, and once back on the road, I then looked in the side mirror on my side of her car and saw the figure standing motionless in the middle of road watching us leave. That when me and my best friend finally could process what just happened. Then just before we got to the main road again, there was an actual kangaroo standing in the middle of the road, which freaked us out more. But we didn't have a car accident from it, and when the car horn was beeped, the kangaroo went on its way, and so did we. Once her place, we quickly got inside and locked the doors, shut any open windows and locked as well as closed the curtains. The rest of the night and early morning we could hear scratching and tapping on the windows, which we ignored and decided to go to bed. Needlessly to say, always trust your gut feeling, or you may not live long enough to tell the tale.